I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm trying to figure out how I was born in 1950, educated in the 50s and 60s. Here it is 58 years later. And the Pledge of Allegiance, I don't think I'd even stand up for. When I was a child, I don't know if you all know the definition of a WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, that was me. Came from a conservative family, had two parents, both worked all the time. Went to a grade school where all the teachers seemed like old maids, but they insisted that we learn. We learned reading, writing, arithmetic. There were black kids in my school. I didn't really know any different. What I'm trying to say is, as far as how somebody should be, or the ideal of somebody growing up in America in the 50s, I think I pretty much had it. In history class, elementary school, we learned about cowboys and Indians. We learned about communism. When I was a child, Harry Truman was the president. He was from Independence, Missouri. I was from Kansas City. Harry Truman was famous for the buck stops here. He led into the Marshall Plan that helped rebuild Europe and Japan. I mean, when I grew up, what I was taught in school was America was the greatest, most helpful country in the world. It was the American way was the best way for the rest of the world. Soon after I was born, there was a Korean War that was fought with communism. In my mind, that was the American way versus communism. It was the Cold War. If we didn't defeat communism in Korea, we'd have to defeat them in Kansas City. We went through that. President Eisenhower comes in. He was a famous general, highly respected, almost apolitical. I don't know, he could have been reelected as a Republican or a Democrat, either one, which probably no one else in my lifetime could have. But at the same time, his accomplishments for the 60s, not great. And what happened after Eisenhower in 1960, Kennedy versus Nixon, that's where I actually was old enough, 10 years old, to actually realize that there were things going on in the country that were contradictory to what I had been taught up to that point. In 1960, or just before the election, something happened to where an American spy plane was shot down over Russia. And I remember this, I couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, but watching TV and Eisenhower saying, no, we didn't have any spy planes over Russia, which President of the United States, the way I was raised, I'd never been taught anywhere that the President of the United States ever lied to anybody about anything. Anyway, next day on TV, here's, I'm not sure who, I think Nikita Khrushchev, though, who was the leader of Russia, on the news, and he's standing there with this American pilot next to him, and pictures of his plane, and Gary Powers, the pilot, saying, yeah, I was flying over Russia spying, got shot down. And that happened. There was no denying that happened. Well, in the election in 1960, Kennedy and Nixon, I don't have a lot to, I mean, I was 10 years old, but I know my own family, all Republicans, all the way back, pretty strong conservative Republicans, church-going Republicans, Presbyterian church. They were, of course, all for Nixon, and I remember my grandma, God love her, sweetest woman I probably ever knew in my life, saying that, you know, she was worried about Kennedy being a Catholic. So that made an impression on my mind from that election, as far as I know, but there again, I was a kid, but I mean, I studied history my whole life. Nixon lost mostly because he sweat, which I'll probably be doing shortly, on TV during the debates, and I mean, and he did look bad, and he wasn't a reassuring thing. Kennedy's number one thing, which part of the reason I'm probably making this whatever the hell it is, I heard a speech that Barack Obama made sometime in the last year, and it reminded me of a Kennedy speech, or the presentation of a Kennedy speech, not a particular Kennedy speech. But anyway, when Kennedy got elected, it was like it was different, you know. I mean, he got more young people involved, people were paying attention to politics, and then he got assassinated when I was 13. And I remember being in class, 8th grade, and they announced it over the intercom, and there were kids in the class that cheered. Because I'm sure, you know, they were good, strong Republicans. And they cheered. And the teacher, she went out in tears. And my sister lived in Dallas at the time, and the paper's here somewhere. This is, I won't say anything that I don't believe to be the truth, but the Dallas newspaper, the Dallas Morning News, I think, the morning of the assassination had an editorial that said, "Why Dallas hates the Kennedys." That was November 22nd, 1963. And now, of course, we all look back on Kennedy, you know, and it's, I'm sure, I hope it's hard for anybody much younger than me to fathom that people cheered when it was announced that Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. In American schools, they cheered. So one thing led to another. LBJ came along, had something called the War on Poverty, passed lots of civil rights legislation, had some good things going, other than the fact Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General, and those two didn't mix, but hopefully that didn't affect too much. Anyway, LBJ had it working. He knew how to work the Congress, which I wish somebody knew how to work the Congress now. But anyway, LBJ had all these good things going, and then along comes Vietnam. And that was it for LBJ, and that was it for us, more or less. In '68, I was a senior in high school. And in the spring of '68, Martin Luther King got shot and killed, supposedly from a guy that had been in prison in Jeff City, Missouri, James Earl Ray. Then in June, Bobby Kennedy gets killed, and it wasn't the same.